Lake levels, obviously a big issue right now, always a big issue because they're always fluctuating. A couple of years ago, tons of flooding in the area, as everyone knows. Houses were falling into Lake Michigan. People were trying to brace them up and all of this type of thing. They had roads collapsing on islands. Beaver Island, for instance, lost two parts of roads and that type of thing. So it was at a high. And when you look at the maps or the charts, they have charts going back for Lake Michigan levels to 1918. You can see they have a pattern. They go up and down. And a couple of years ago, they were at a peak, about as high as they've ever been. Since then, they've been dropping dramatically. And that makes sense that our water is going down here, and it makes sense that the shoreline is then adjusted, sand is moved around it, and that type of thing. The question is if these inland lakes, our lakes here in Dalton Township, are being affected more than that adjustment, because at the same time that those water levels peaked and started going down, there was obviously the political fight, the not not super intelligent political fight over the channels and the lake level outlet device and the Ribe drain and all of that mess that a lot of people know about. And so, did that affect these inland lakes more? And it appears to me, no. I've been looking into it and trying to figure it out. The nearest ground saturation monitoring site that the feds have in the area is in Hesperia. In the last 2 years, just the ground saturation has dropped 9 inches. So everything in Lake Michigan has dropped a few feet. So everything's dropping pretty dramatically at this point. And I contacted the DNR. They have a few messages. They don't have documents because I asked for documents. They have a few messages from back in the 1940s and 50s of a similar event where these inland lakes seemed to be affected greater, to a larger extent, when there was a downturn in the water. And specifically these ones, they had specific mention of Goose Egg Lake. Then obviously we have Northwest, Middle, and Twin. And so that's really been the question, and the setup of the lakes has changed a number of times over the years. The channels are a mess. The township invested at least $84,000, maybe more than that. Huge political fight with the drain commissioner and everything. And then, but that was shorting it money. So then the correct culvert, the box culvert, instead of the regular round culvert, wasn't able to be put in the one bridge. The road commission delayed it a year. Still, funds hadn't been allocated or found, the extra $70,000 for that. And then the sides of the channels, they shorted on money, so they didn't brace them up with anything for the most part, like a little bit of wrap. And if you really wanted for them to hold well, you need rock or cement walls or something like that, something really extensive, which would be a lot more money. So then a special assessment district should have been set up around the lakes, which was not done for that project. So there was a lot. And then the Ribe drain was obviously hugely costly, and Brenda had put a bunch of switchbacks in to try to feed phosphorus out of the lake, because the lakes had a little too much phosphorus when the water's coming out. Last year, the dramatic drop. In the spring of last year, we had boats could go in between the channels, and we had decently high water. And I believe some water was flowing out of the Ribe drain, but pretty soon boats stopped, go through the channels because the water was dropping, the sides were collapsing from all the wave action, especially the one between Twin Lake and Middle, where people were running their jet skis through and skiing through and that type of thing. So that wave action collapsed the sides, and then the water was dropping like crazy as well. And fairly early on, water stopped being able to go out of the Ribe drain. There wasn't any going out because the water dropped pretty low. Now, the lake level outlet device on the south side of Twin Lake there is an underground dam. That's what it is. I've had multiple people ask me to turn off the pump, and there is no pump. It's a gravity-fed underground dam is all that it is. And it was wood, and it was janky. It wasn't in that great a shape, and at some point it had been cut. And I thought it was a long time ago just from the way it looked. I was figuring a decade ago, something like that. But I did hear that a last supervisor cut it when they were having a fight with the drain commissioner and all that mess. But at some point it was cut the top 6 inches. And that basically set it at winter levels all the time, because from May 15th to October 15th, it's supposed to be able to be 6 inches higher. But once you cut a board like that, you can't. And it was old wood, and it wasn't in great shape. So I wanted to get it replaced so that it was working properly and functioning properly. Then Brenda said technically it's her jurisdiction. no point in having that fight because she's correct by the documentation that I found of when the Corps of Engineers put it in 1984. And so she used funds she already had from the ride drain, so she didn't increase the tax, and replaced that with a better system made out of what they still call logs apparently, but they're aluminum and rubber and that type of thing. But even in the middle of last year, the ride drain on the back side of that, once you go over the road, it had started to grow grass in it and everything. No water was coming out. I checked it a number of times. And so then the big question becomes, is that dam leaking? It's obviously not going out the end of the tube, but if it's leaking, is it losing it somewhere in the tube? So is that damaged somewhere? Is it cracked and then just leaking in the ground? So there were those questions. Then the Drain Commissioner, the Water Resources Commissioner, they renamed it this year, not too long ago, a few weeks ago, a month ago. They went back out and looked into that and drained that water out because the sides of the dam inside were equalizing the water, which shouldn't happen because your water should be higher on one side, lower on the other side. That's how a dam works. And so I was concerned that they were equalizing the sides. Went out there and checked it out a few times, and that, I don't know if that's functioning properly. Did get documentation that the pipe is different than I thought. I assumed that you would have a dam and then a pipe running down to drain, and the pipe actually runs up. And so got plans on this. And the pipe, this is the side that comes in from the lake, and then this is the side that goes under the road to the drain, and it actually goes up. And then it's on here as well, and from the lake, and then across the road, under the road, and it goes up on that side. And that was counterintuitive to me, but I'm not an engineer, and now it makes a lot of sense. It's set up as a safety. So if that underground dam completely failed, the lake still, just because of that pipe going up, couldn't drop below the winter level. So all we're talking about is the top 6 inches, which is irrelevant to what the lake levels are now because they're below the 6 inches that they could possibly be at. So you have to get enough rain during that time, and the springs have to be cranking enough in the lakes to generate enough water to get up to that 6-inch top variance for summer versus winter levels. So that's all we're playing with that. The lake level outlet device is what I found in some of the documentation, but it's an underground dam there. And that it was drained, the Drain Commissioner drained it, and then ran a video camera underneath through the tube, and I was there and I watched them, and no cracks or anything like that in the pipe. And then I was talking to one of the engineers, and he said that you would get some leakage in between the seams in the pipe, and then that water would flow back to the side because of the way the pipe is set up at the angle. Plus, when it was drained, there were a few leaks coming through the dam. Now, they were relatively small. The engineers did some calculations and estimated that it might drain the lake if that water was just draining out, which it's not, so it would only count if it got up to that higher level where it could push it out because of summer levels, that top 6 inches, the other side of the ride drain, into the ride drain. And so if that was happening, it was at those very top levels, that it would take something like 3 months to drop it less than an inch. So the water's not being lost there, which brings into questioning, are the lakes still being affected more than before? Are the springs running slower? Something like that. I am not sure. Or is this just part of the cycle that we see going on around us, where a bunch of the wetlands have dried out, and how we're in this down cycle for water that I'm sure will continue for a while as everyone complains about the water going down, and then it'll cycle again, and it'll start going up, and everyone complain about the water going up and getting too high, and then the danger to the house, and getting into the septic systems around the lake, which definitely was doing for a number of years there, and then you get a little too much pollution in the lakes and high phosphorus contents and things like that. And so it's certainly part of a cycle, and it appears to be part of a normal cycle, or a natural cycle at least, but I think it's still questionable, and it may be that part of that natural cycle actually affects these inland lakes a little more than would be expected. And so those are the discussions that I've had with DNR Fisheries. Oddly enough, had those messages from the 1940s and 50s, or some communications. And Eagle, I've had about other things and about this and overall the lake levels and are these being affected more and that type of thing, and the drain commissioner and the conservation district and these different organizations try to figure out if there is some sort of problem here, and it appears to be part of this natural cycle. It just may affect these more. And I know that there is a person in the area doing a master's degree study on the history of the lake levels, so hopefully he's able to make some progress on that. I got him a bunch of documentation. He came in and got some. I dropped some off to him, copies, obviously, the documentation I had on this project from the 1970s, late 1970s, early 1980s. And so it'll be interesting. I haven't heard anything back on that, but it would be interesting to know more about it. And there's a ton of documentation and stuff here at the township. The issue is the documentation is a mess. It is a mess. And it's a lot to go through. I'm getting quotes on digitizing it so that I can make it more available, and we're signing up with Municode and working at getting quotes on redoing the website so things can be more available and communication can be better on these types of things. And there's just so much to go through. I found a book on zoning, which they obviously had something like published, printed and bound together to give out to people from the 1980s. It's decently nice. I grabbed it. Compiled by Ordnance Systems, and in the back of here there's a zoning map that looks like a game of Tetris. The zoning was wild in the 1980s. Here, I'll hold this up. So it really does look like a game of Tetris on there with all these different zones and the high water level areas and things like this. This one's 1980, and these were throughout the 1980s. I don't know. I know there was a big rezoning in 06, but I don't know if there were big rezonings before that or exactly what it is. And it'd be nice to get all that together. I don't know if it's realistically going to be in the budget to digitize the records here. I'm having one room quoted of just tons of boxes and those types of things. And I don't know if some of it deals with, there's a bunch of tax records, obviously. There's a bunch of building stuff, but there's some, like, I saw one box that was labeled as birth records, so maybe a genealogy society might be interested in helping to digitize some of those, and that might be good. So just things I'm looking into to make these more available, and you have no idea what you're going to find. I found one box that's labeled Tony's Black Files, and I'm like, oh, is there, like, that doesn't sound good. And when I was digging into it, it's just a bunch of problems that have occurred in the township, the history of, like, the sewer and Story Cordova for the business park and those types of things. So just various issues that the township's been dealing with in its history, in its long history, long and complex. And so we're going to making that more available. I've been collecting in files different things, but one of them is on lake levels specifically. And so I'm hoping to make those more available in some way. I might just scan them in and then have like a PDF on lake level history, something like that. So we'll figure more of that out going forward, so everyone can see the various documentation that I'm finding and collecting and putting together on these types of issues. So any questions, thoughts, ideas, comments, concerns, feel free to reach out. My direct line at the office is area code 231-332-6700 or email supervisor@daltontownship.org. Thanks.